Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. Cath-Anne Ambrose, script coordinator and production associate for Stargate SG-1, is joining me for this episode to share stories of her time on production. She joined in season 2 and went through about season 7 of Stargate SG-1, and also was on for the pilot episode Rising of Stargate Atlantis. We're going to spend a little time catching up with her and getting to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of a lot of what went on behind the scenes for SG-1. So let's bring her in. Cath-Anne Ambrose, production associate and script coordinator for Stargate SG-1. Cath-Anne, I am privileged to have you now. I have been a fan of yours since all the way back in your Gate World interview. Darren says hello, by the way. So this is really cool to finally have you on and get to share some stories and get to know each other a little bit ourselves. So I appreciate having you.
Oh, thank you so much, David, for bringing me on your show.
This is terrific. How did you get involved in? So, you know what? Let me back up. How's it going now? What are you up to these days? What's
Okay.
what's currently happening with you?
Well, I left the film industry. I kind of went back and
Yeah.
forth. Um, I went back and I did a master's degree in 2010 in communications.
Okay.
And when I got out of there, I was really interested in teaching. So right away, I got a job pretty quickly with my resume, doing a part-time media and public relations course. And then I applied for a job at BCIT, which is the British Columbia Institute of Technology,
Okay.
much like a polytechnic institute that you would have in the US and all over the world, actually. And they were looking for a communications instructor to teach various communications courses. And it said, preferential candidates will have a background in media, film, television, or public relations. And I literally saw this ad on a Friday at 4 o'clock, and the job closed at 4:30. And I was like, oh,
Whoa.
and I was looking for teaching jobs. And I thought, oh, I'll send my resume into the heat, right? Monday morning, they called me. They were like, we got your resume. We'd like to bring you in for an interview. And then by Thursday, I was in for an interview. I had to do a teaching demo, and I think they had me do a little mini lecture on how to write a
Yeah.
press release. And then by Monday, they were like, can we call you references?
Yeah.
And by the way, Bill Viggers, who was our publicist, gave me a glowing reference. Um, and then they made a job offer and I was hired. And the reason why they hired me was because I was teaching into broadcast. So I teach communications, and everybody pretty much that goes through any program has to take various communications courses as mandatory, like mathematics.
I've done it.
Okay.
I've done it.
Exactly.
My degree is in communications, so
Exactly.
I
So
get
you
it.
know exactly what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right? So, but the particular one of the courses that they had me teaching, like right out of the gate, was for communications for broadcast journalism
Yeah.
students. But we made a 10-minute, actually, I think it was 8-minute, we called them the fun features. So we made short films. All right. And so myself and a colleague who, taught, it was sort of a joint course with a production course and then my course. So I did all the script development with them. I would make them come in and pitch their little fun features as a team. And the point is so that journalists could learn how to use the cameras and how to craft a story and all of the elements, lighting that are involved, but and get to work as a team in their first semester. So, they learn team building and all the stuff that goes along with filmmaking. And then we had these, we had our like award ceremony. We call it the Jello Awards. Some journalist, a very famous Canadian journalist, created this, Stephen
Okay.
Quinn. And when he went to BCIT, it's one of like the top schools for journalism. And anyway, so yeah, we had an award ceremony. So that was great. So we did that. But now I teach, somebody asked that course, there was some politics that went on about the about the amount of time
Okay.
it took the curriculum to do the fun feature. And now the course has changed. So I teach every semester it's something different. I teach marketing students. I teach communications for robotics and mechatronics students.
Wow.
And by the way, they love Stargate, just saying.
Those replicators, man.
They love mechatronics students. Yes, all over, all over the map. And yeah, it's great. It's a great, sort of post-film life.
Normally, when someone hears, yeah, I'm in the film and television industry, a lot of people who are probably watching are like, how could she have left?
Right?
And not every career arc is the same specific industry. A lot of people find themselves in teaching at some point in their lives. I've done it for one of my industries, and there's something so rewarding. I had this conversation actually with Bill Merchant just a few weeks ago. There's something so satisfying about giving something back.
I love, people, you hear all these, everybody thinks young kids are this and that. And it's like, I see so many hardworking kids working 2 jobs.
Yeah.
Like trying to do all of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
pay for their education. And I don't see that from my vantage point. I mean, obviously, in any sort of post-secondary classroom, you're going to have things that happen.
Of course.
But, for the most part, if you're not serious, at least where I teach, you get weeded out by the end of first year. Like in broadcasting, in our broadcasting and television programs, you can't be late.
No.
So if you're late, because we run it like a production hub. Yeah. And so you get late, you're automatically like minus 10% of your overall mark.
There's a certain amount of stress that is just a part of the deal, like you have deadlines, and you have to get this stuff out for a show at a certain time. So we're going to run you through your paces now, because if you can't figure it out here, we're not serving you anything by, we're not giving you any, helping you out along the way by changing it up so that you have to go back and do the real thing later.
No.
So,
and, and it's true. It's like, you have to, if you want a career in film and television, you have to look at that. Do you have the stamina to work those hours?
Yeah.
Can you live a feast or famine lifestyle? Yeah. There's a lot of factors that are not just, about working in film. There's a lot of things you have to look at, because it's definitely a certain lifestyle. Yeah. And it's great when you're young. Like, it's so much fun.
Yeah, you figure out what you're made of.
Yeah. But the older you get, you want security, a little more stability in life is good. But
what are you wearing?
That's what I'm doing.
I saw a Stargate on insignia on your jacket there. What do you have on?
Okay, so I have very little memorabilia left.
It looks like a poker shirt or something. Oh, it's bowling.
Yes, it's a bowling shirt. Now, this was Brad Wright's father-in-law had a bowling team in Toronto, or in Scarborough, that we were sponsoring. I believe this is the story. And, often I had to get swag made for some event or as part of my job. I was always trying to get stuff out of MGM, like, send me more swag. So we were always doing giveaways, and, a visitor would come. And so somehow in the back of my closet, I found this shirt. I've never worn it. And it says Reg. And I'm thinking, maybe Reg dropped off the bowling team. I don't know. But somehow I ended up with Reg's shirt. And it has a nice Stargate embroidery. And then where's the patch? Where's the patch? Oh, here's the patch.
There. Wow.
Yeah. So these are like, you could not find these anywhere.
No, you can't. No, and you've got there's like a little flame underneath the Reg. Yeah.
They were made specifically for Brad Wright's father-in-law bowling team.
Wow. That's really cool.
I don't know if he's with us, but
yeah. I wonder what the little flame is there. underneath Reg.
I don't know. I think maybe just to make it a bowling shoe.
Yeah. Well, the modern
Wondering
kids would say that's really fire. So
yeah,
it's
who
really
knows?
fire. That
It
that
could
whole thing
have
there is
something.
fire. So
I don't know.
how did you find your way into Stargate? Where were you from originally, and how did that snowball into Bridge Studios?
Okay, so I grew up in Scarborough, which is a suburb of Toronto.
Okay.
And as it turns out, so did Brad Wright, which is a complete coincidence, which we realized like after working together for quite a while, that we're up about 10 minutes away. It's so bizarre. So I grew up in Scarborough, and I had an uncle who was a Canadian gospel singer. Okay.
Oh.
And yes. And I came from I was adopted into a very musical family. And my uncle Tommy Ambrose, you can all Google Tommy Ambrose, still alive. He was a famous jingle writer, and he wrote a lot of like beer commercials, but he was also had these shows. I think he had 3 or 4 shows on the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Network. And so as a little girl, I would go and sit in the audience of his tapings with my, all the relatives and things like that. So I was always a little like, this is fun, right? This is cool. And then, again, like I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something with media. Like I always sort of this broad spectrum. And then I went to university. I studied communications and political science. And I was always the person, I joined a lot of clubs, and they'd be like, oh, you're the director of publicity and promotion for the political science forum. And, I'd sit on the school newspaper on the board, always behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In all of my jobs, I was always very behind the scenes. And after university, I just started applying for jobs. I almost took a job at a record company, and I could have gone down a whole different path.
Sure could have.
It's sort of like I was looking at different industries, and then I saw this ad in the Toronto Star newspaper, and it said, film production and distribution company looking for a publicity or marketing assistant. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect. So I sent my resume and went for an interview, and then they called me back and they said, you didn't get the job. And then about a week later, they called me back and they said, somebody quit. Right? And would you be willing to come in? It was a different job. It was a receptionist office manager type job, but would you be willing to come in for that position? I said, absolutely. So and then as life works out, within 6 months, I got the original job that I'd applied for, the publicity job. So I did that, and it was, I had nothing to do with production. I didn't really understand production. And I remember walking we had an editing room in our office, and it was all very, mysterious with, the editor's room. And I walked in and I saw him splicing film and playing. It was like on the Steam Deck, and he was playing it back and forth. And the company made nature documentaries. It was a very famous kind of Canadian company. And I was like, what's going on in here? And then, he started explaining that. And then I got more interested in the production side.
Yeah.
And then I started volunteering. I volunteered we have the Canadian Film Centre, which is sort of like your version of the AFI. Okay. So I volunteered on some projects, with young directors that are in the program, did that. A lot of friends, I was living in an area of Toronto, which is called Queen Street West, and there's a lot of musicians and artists. And so, one weekend we'd be like, oh, such and such is making a music video. And then we would all go and volunteer and work on it and help each other, right? Somebody, needs to do this for their demo reel or whatever. We're helping each other out. And then randomly I got a job on a movie of the week. And that was my first American, I thought I had made it so big. I'm working on this, NBC movie of the week in the production office. And I just thought, this is, I'd hear them, I'd hear the producers yelling, I made her career. What do you mean she doesn't want, want to be in the show, or just very Hollywood like sort of vibe, and be like, whoa, this is like amazing. And then I did some movies of the week, and then I decided I wanted to move to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to check it out because I knew they had a production industry, and I was attracted to the lifestyle. Like, I wanted to live in California, obviously. I wanted to live near the ocean and the mountains. And so I moved out to Vancouver, and all of the jobs I'd done in Toronto, I'd been like a director's assistant. I was always sort of, worked in the production office, but they were all non-union jobs. And Vancouver was much more unionized when I first moved out here. All the production office jobs were unionized. So I randomly met a woman who was a neighbor's friend. She said, you need to meet I think it was her cousin. You need to meet my cousin. She works in film. You might, have a connection or something. I met her. She said, and I'd already been doing, on the TV movies, I'd been doing script revisions and working with the writers and producers and editing. And people didn't know how to use the script software. It was very expensive, like Final Draft. And I think I worked on Script Thing and, all these different...
Relatively new tools.
They were.
Yeah.
And so the fact I had any kind of ability kind of gave me that leg up. And so this random neighbor introduced me to this woman, Shauna Bryan. She's a visual effects producer now. And she's like, I got a call she's like, do you know how to use script software? And I was like, yeah. She goes, I got a call from this TV series that they're looking for someone to come in and work in the story department and do scripts. So I went for an interview, and I just had a baby. My daughter was 2 months old.
Aww.
That's going to come full circle.
Okay.
Because my daughter has now started working in film.
Oh, no.
Full circle.
Chip off the old block.
So, yeah, so I remember I went in, I interviewed. I remember Jonathan asked me, how come there's a gap on your resume? And I said, well, I had a baby. Yeah. And he's like, that makes sense. Like, there's no, they're always afraid of that, like, you have a gap on your resume.
Yeah. What have you been doing with yourself? Raising a child.
Right? So anyways, then I remember I was walking up the car, and they're like, so do you like science fiction? And I was like, well, I do now.
If there's a steady paycheck with it, yes.
I was like, oh. And I started the same day Peter DeLuise started. I remember it was his season. Yeah, like our first meeting, Peter had just arrived. He'd been living in the U.S.
Yeah.
And John Smith helped him to, that, and, get his Canuck card.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, we started on the same day, and it was a lot, like, looking back in hindsight, they had a woman, her name was Victoria James, and she'd been their kind of production associate, script coordinator, clearance person on The Outer Limits, and she left, and I took over. So, I had big boots to fill. Wow. And it was, at that time, so I think what they did is kind of merged. I think she also had a script coordinator. I think they merged both the jobs together. So I did, but I got this production associate title because that was her title originally. Yeah. And but then I felt like I felt like it didn't really define what I did. Yeah. And so it was, but for the most part, all of the job descriptions kind of morphed between the script coordinator, production associate.
Okay. What is that translating to on a day-to-day, or should I say episode-to-episode responsibility for you? Can you take me through that, please? Okay.
So the story department would have scripts in multiple phases going, obviously. Someone's working on an outline, someone's working on a writer's draft. We're in production, we're going into production on one of them. We're already in production, and we need to make production revisions. So a lot of sort of keeping all the balls up in the air. And everything was fed through me. So Tor, Brad would write a script and he'd be like, writer's draft, give it to me, print it out, then they'd go through it. Like, it wasn't like we could just put them up in a Dropbox or something today, right? So again, we were using like floppy disks. There'd be like, whatever it would, episode, it'd be writer's draft, or outline, writer's draft, second writer's draft. And so it was a lot of that, and then I would have to send them to MGM, various departments, lawyers, the clearance company, and then we would go, once it got into production, we'd go out and be released to the world, to the production office and everybody working on the show. But
on 3.5-inch floppies.
Yeah, that's how it started.
Wow.
And then, we'd even have problems with, I think I had I had like a PC, and then, some of the writers had Macs. We had some like format issues.
Oh my gosh. Back in the day, man.
Oh my God. It was crazy when you look back at it. And then, so that was one component. I think I also had to do any kind of product placement, clearances they needed. And that was, that in itself was quite the interesting, task.
So for like product placement, occasionally there were brands that you could recognize in the show, even though most of it took place off world. What was that like? Tell me about that. Like what kind of, I'm trying to remember some of that. Yeah, like North Face was all the rave in the show later on. But not yet.
No, and at the beginning, and yet depending on what the company was, like I always tell the story, like I believe it was the Heather Ash episode, and the girl's writing on the wall she's gets a set of Crayola crayons.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So I had
learning
to go
curve
back
for Crayola.
I had to go back and forth with Crayola because Crayola doesn't want to be associated with anything that has guns, right? Oh. And so I had to go back and forth. And the other thing that the company was like, they didn't like the fact she was writing on the wall. They didn't want their products to be, whatever, just
wall art. Yeah, they didn't want kids to turn around and start doing that in households, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was one I remember, and you get these requests. It's like, oh, in the next episode, Rick wants to read Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
Did you hear about that one?
No.
So Mad Magazine's like, nope. And it's hard for me because I have to go back to the producers and say, like, not interested, right? Yeah. They don't want. So Michael Greenberg's like, are you kidding? Because I guess there was some history with RDA in the show of Mad Magazine. So he picked up the phone, and then we got Mad Magazine.
I'm trying to remember Mad Magazine in the Stargate episode. I remember him reading a tabloid in the Martin Lloyd episode, Point of No Return, which says headless alien found in topless bar.
Maybe we didn't know.
It was like an Inquirer tabloid, but I don't remember Mad Magazine. I could be wrong.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I don't know.
That's wild. I remember him playing a Game Boy once for the Ergo episode. Is like something like a Game Boy? Would you have to clear, or is it because it's just a physical prop?
I don't remember clearing the Game Boy for that episode. And again, like the art department, they could fudge everything.
Yeah, that's true.
If you didn't get clearance. Most companies were pretty good with it.
Yeah.
I remember one of the hardest things I had to get clear was the dictionary. I swear to God.
Like Merriam-Webster?
Yeah, it was like Daniel wanted to, like, in his office, be looking at something in the dictionary. And I go to, I was going through all the different, like, Random House, Merriam-Webster, like all the biggies, Oxford. And they were just all such snobs. Like, oh, that's going to cost you, or no, we don't. It was the weirdest thing because it's a dictionary.
Some people are just particular about their ad placement because I guess they look at it as kind of free advertising, so they're going to be really selective about it.
But at that point, like, I think it was like I sort of wrote it off to be like publishing, being like, we don't need our product. People are going to buy the dictionary. We don't need any other, free advertising.
And it's not
But
one of
yeah,
those things where you go out and say, you know what, I really need to get a dictionary today. Yeah, I need to know those
not
adverbs.
anymore, but at that time,
Right. Never once in my life have I been like, I need to know the synonym for bands.
see, I'm the
Banns.
opposite. I'm the opposite. I had like, I had thesauruses and synonym finders
That's
and
so funny.
yeah.
What about the Air Force? Was
Oh, the
there
air.
communication with
Yeah,
the Air Force for,
yeah.
various
Lots
things?
of lots of communications with the Air Force. I'd have to send them the scripts.
That's
They would give,
right.
so John Tonioli, and Tom Gianazzo, who I think worked at the
Yes.
Pentagon. So they would give notes. They also gave notes on like things like costumes, like
Yeah.
that person wouldn't have those epaulets, or would you'd have to, stuff like that. Yeah, I found that a really interesting part of the whole show, because growing up in Canada, see, I was thinking about this. I was like, I don't know if I knew one person that went into the military my entire life, and
Wow.
then suddenly it's very different here,
Yeah.
and suddenly we're having planes in the show, and
Yeah.
the general of the Air Force. I thought about this the other day, and I'll tell you why. When they came up, General Ryan, I
General
believe his name.
Ryan. Yeah.
General Ryan and his wife came up.
His wife came too.
Yeah, his wife came too. I have a nice picture. I'll have to find it.
Oh, yes. Please.
Go to the archives and find some photos for you.
Please.
But yeah, so they came up, but before they came up, they swept the studio, the bridge studios, like inside and out. I was thinking, not to diverge.
You're talking security. We're not talking brooms.
Security. We're talking security.
Yeah.
Their security came up like 3 days before.
Yeah.
And swept our whole buildings and the other buildings on the lot. I'm thinking, so I felt like, I've been, had some exposure to the Secret Service or whatever they were.
Right, exactly. The chief of staff is coming through. That had to have been a big deal. I remember the photo of the general with RDA, and that was just that's quite the nod for the show. And in that same episode, which is I believe it's Prodigy, is when we get a look at the inside of the Air Force Academy. Not necessarily the real Air Force Academy, but they simulate it. And so that was a big deal. The Air Force has said, at one point it was their biggest recruitment for their whole thing that Stargate was.
They would come to the conventions.
Wow.
Those people set up a booth at the conventions in Canada.
For GateCon? Really? I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, I remember at least 1 or 2 of the conventions going out in Richmond. And they set up and we're like, that's so bizarre. But then, people come from all over the world. So.
Well, they have questions, they have questions about how the organization integrated with the show. That's really, it's not common. It's not commonly done. So
no,
how exciting!
But those guys have the best job. They were like the entertainment liaison officers for the American Air Force and the Pentagon. Wow. So they got to, John Tolioli and Tom Gianazzo, they got to go to different sets, and they took Brad. He got to go on a fighter jet.
Yep.
The American Air Force. I can tell you that's right. The American Air Force, with all these huge movie moguls, got sent down there, and they did a whole.
Yeah, Brad would have been in his element for sure. Yeah,
it was. They did G's and
in
the around and all that stuff.
Wow. So
other stuff. Yeah, there was just so much. A lot of administrative stuff with the Writers Guild of Canada. So once your outline would get approved, we had to sort of follow the collective agreement of the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild and all, the various unions. So your script, your pitch would go to outline. We had to let the Writers Guild know. Then then it would go to a writer's draft or a first draft. We had to let the Writers Guild know. So every draft, and then we had to let the Writers Guild, because that would affect credits.
Right. So they're just keeping track of everything as you move forward.
Yes.
They're not waiting for
So
the final script to be done and then to have that information. That's interesting.
no, you need to tell them at each step of the process, okay, because you might get at night, like, so for like Brad, there would be episodes where like outline by or story by,
Yeah.
and then they've been cut off because they couldn't write an outline or they didn't like the outline, and they're like, okay, we're going to take this over.
Yeah. So
And
they want to
which
have the
is
trail.
yeah, it's basically a paper trail. And I dealt with the lawyers a lot as far as things like E&O insurance. So they would do a review, they would get the clearance report. So every episode had to go through a clearance company. We used Act One script clearance.
Is that for like names and for
Yeah.
legal things?
So say we want to do an episode and there's a David Reed and but he goes around and he wipes out a whole planet. Now they'll come back and say, well, there is one David Reed in wherever supposedly. I mean, if it was off world, that was fine, but it could be like wherever it was. Be like, we suggest your name would be fine actually because it's a fairly common name, but sometimes these guys would want to name a character after somebody they knew, and then they come back. There's one real living person with that exact same name living in this area, and the lawyers would say, no, you change the name. And then depending on the writers would be like, no, that was my buddy from high school. We're gonna.
Oh, okay. Is it just to keep things clear in the event of a possible lawsuit?
Sorry, I'm very ADD. I don't know.
No, you're okay. No, you're okay. You should see me after some caffeine. But so this is to avoid legal issues like lawsuits and things like that, for someone to come after you and say, hey, you've defamed me.
Yes.
Okay,
so
wow.
In order to get what's called errors and omissions insurance,
okay,
you have to have a lawyer sign off on it.
I see.
So we had our entertainment lawyers, and then that would then go down to MGM to their legal department, and it's again a trail, the chain of documents, things like that. But so they could say, well, this whole show is insured except this name. So like this person could come after you, like she'd say, I'm signing off on this except for this.
Oh, so they can literally put, except for this issue, this is clear. Wow.
Yeah. But they didn't usually do that. It was pretty,
I know a number of cases there were writers who, put a certain name in there. I didn't realize that they would be like, okay, well, we have everything good except for this. Well, this person that you're flagging is my friend.
Right.
Interesting.
So then they'd be like, forget it, keep it in.
Yeah, interesting. The nuts and bolts of a TV show. Wow.
But then I would say the other thing is I was like the gatekeeper. So my office was sort of at the beginning of the little executive wing there. And, people are coming in all day long. Brad, I need to show you these special effects. Jonathan, you have to see this, just nonstop.
So you were a physical barrier sometimes?
Well, they'd be like, is he available? Because you have to understand, you guys are writing.
Yeah.
Like, you can't have, and they have enough distractions going on all day long.
That's right. They have to have time to write.
You can't just have rogue people that come in and then they're like, and it happened a couple times where somebody would come in and be like, Brad, I've got this idea, so, for an episode.
Oh,
and then Brad would be like, why did you let, such and such through the gate? I was like, I'm the gatekeeper of the gate.
So you learned pretty quickly, what he was after and the certain times that he was trying to get stuff done.
You had to.
Wow.
Like, you had to protect their time because, everybody wants to, chit chat with the writers and the showrunners, or, like I said, people would come in and be like, have an idea for an episode. And then they're put in a position where it's like, okay. But it was, for the most part, I had like agents calling me all day long, sending scripts. I would read scripts and then I would write little synopses of the scripts and give them to Brad and Jonathan and say, oh, I don't know, this was okay. But, by the end of it, it was so hard to get in the room to pitch. And it became so successul. I was sort of there and I felt like, I remember when things just started getting kind of a bit like when it changed, right? We used to be able, you could bring your mother on set and give her a tour. Nobody cared. Then it had to be like you had to have them sign off on a release form. You had to get permission. It just started becoming much more structured
Show's
and
getting
corporate.
bigger.
Then you started having like busloads of fans that were coming up to the gate and, stuff like that. Fan mail, like crazy amounts of fan mail, and everything would just get dumped on my desk. Like, here you go, Cath-Anne, here you go. Anywhere they wouldn't know where to put something, that they get the production office get a call. I'd pick up the phone and be like, my name's such and such, and I gave the idea of Stargate to Richard Dean Anderson.
Oh no, you're right. Sure, you did. Sure.
Just like crazy. Oh, just yeah.
Yeah, because the Bridge Studios, I mean, Stargate Productions, that number was probably, I'm sure, publicly registered.
Oh yeah.
So
but you would get calls. I remember once I got a call from like a kid who wants to write an episode, and
get an agent, buddy.
That's exactly. I was like, okay, here's how this works.
Yeah, yeah.
But
he didn't know.
No, and lots, and I think he actually did get a lawyer or somebody. He did send his idea, like, go anywhere.
Wow.
But I'm quite nice, so it was oftentimes hard to be like the gatekeeper.
Well, sure. You don't want to have to say no to people.
Well, if people would, send their scripts or their agents, and you're getting constant, follow up, and did they read them? No, they haven't read them yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to say, yeah, no, it's not going to go anywhere. Bye.
We're not moving forward.
It's like being the dream crusher.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was hard to get in, and
for a little while there, you were reading spec scripts.
Yeah, I was reading spec scripts from agents, and I would write like a 1-page synopsis and give it to Donna.
Condense it.
But it was so much time. Like when I first started, it was that was a big part of the job, doing all the script revisions, all the clearances. It was a big job.
What was it like?
This is what I wanted to tell you.
Yeah.
We had what we called the Bible, and it was a database that somebody had developed before I got there. And it was like what planets they were going to, what the code was, like all the different, who were the aliens, what was the technology, what was, it was a really interesting database. But then Gate World came out, and it was like, we don't need to do this, like, because it was sort of the beginning of, these kinds of websites. And it was like, I don't need to be spending my time keeping this database when there are people who are out there doing it. And I can focus my efforts on other things. Yeah. And so I felt like the Bible kind of, at one point, it just was so time consuming that it wasn't worth upkeeping.
I remember the Lexicon. It was the gal who runs Rick's website, rdanderson.com. And she was the one who created the Lexicon that was actually the Bible that was on the table there. And her name is escaping me right now. Shame on me. But that was one of the things that the Gate World, that me and Darren over at Gate World competed with, because ours was indexable and searchable. So it was a big deal keeping track of all those things,
Huge. It was huge. So what else? I'm just trying to think what else. Just whatever it was just this catch-all kind of position, where, sometimes they'd be like, I remember one time they're like, we want to translate this scene into ancient Mayan, and it's up after lunch, like stuff like that.
Wow.
And then I'd be like, okay. And I had this linguist at Harvard.
Okay, so you could call a professor.
And they also had this other guy from UC Santa Barbara who was an Egyptologist. Okay?
Yes, and that's probably Stuart Tyson Smith.
I think he might have been on some sort of retainer. I don't know. The guy from Harvard would just do favors for me, just out of to help out, because he was an academic, and he put some grad student onto it. But so I'd call, like, the ancient Mayan thing. It was like, well, somebody knows somebody who lives in this village, but you're not going to get it back for 2 weeks, and they can speak in this dialect. And I was like, oh, it's up after lunch. I need it.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
That's
stuff like that. Oh, he's decided that it's going to be in Latin, right?
oh no.
And you have to be. That's what I'm saying.
Have to
It's
be
a lot
ready.
of, they always say it's hurry up and wait, and it is. Like
Yeah.
film is, yeah, they come to you, okay, bam, you got to make things happen really fast. So yeah, it
It's
was.
just I can only imagine what that was like getting on board, jumping onto a moving train in
Yeah,
season 2 where this thing has already taken off, sitting down at that desk where stuff has been probably left there from, I'm sure they didn't like clean everything. Like you have to pick up the Rolodex and everything else that's already been established and feel your way into this thing until you can make it your own. I
yeah.
can only imagine the
You know
sleepless
what?
nights
Like,
for the first, few days there.
oh, there was a few. Yeah, it's not like anyone's going to be training you.
No.
It's that kind of a you do. You have to, sink or swim.
Yeah, you have to feel your way
And
through it.
yeah, and I like to work a lot with the publicity department. I was sort of fearing like maybe I'll end up in publicity. And so I would, if there was media or somebody they needed someone to tour them around set. I was often the person. Somebody won a contest, or somebody from MGM's wife is a huge fan, right? So she's coming up, some big shot's wife. So I'm actually still friends with that wife. Yeah, she was great.
Kate Ritter.
So,
Kate Ritter ran the Lexicon over at R.D. Anderson. Sorry, Kate.
yeah,
So
no, it was her name is Janine. She's got a million followers on Twitter. Anyways,
oh wow, okay.
yeah, like so, they would be like, go do this, go do that. Yeah, like I would go to, we would have nominations. I did what's the other thing? I did like all the awards. So we had
Yeah.
to do all the awards, to the Emmys, to the Leo Awards, to any other things we were going to apply for. That also is political because it's like you're only going to submit so many episodes and so many actors. So it's like, who are you going to pick?
Who are you gonna pick?
Right? So they
For
would
sure.
make those decisions, and then there might be some political fallout, but they would try to get everybody sort of.
I remember
in
the production designers getting to share credit for
Yes.
the episode Jolinar's Memories,
Yes.
because everyone was involved in that one. And so Richard Hugh Dolan was very specific to make sure that all of the production designers at that point were credited on that particular award. And it's just like, you have to be careful about people's feelings. And all of the man hours that have been put into things like this.
Right?
It's so easy to overlook someone. Can only imagine.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
And stuff like that. And then they would announce them, and I would go downtown, and there'd be like this press conference, stuff like that. What else? Oh, I don't know.
were you responsible for helping to make the end of year parties work?
No.
That was not
I
you.
wasn't.
Okay.
That would be the production office. I would
Wow.
sometimes have to get swag or those
Yeah.
types of ones. Yeah, but no, that would be the production office.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, the best party that I ever went to, probably my entire life, was the 100th episode party. It was unbelievable. It was, and MGM organized that. That was done in LA.
Oh, it was in LA.
No, it was here.
Oh, okay.
But the LA, MGM's
branch.
They took that over because it was such a high profile event.
Yeah.
And it was at the Four Seasons Hotel, and you walked in, and then there was a Stargate, and it had, all that smoke, and you walked through, and there was this ballroom that was like phenomenal. That had like an oyster station, and all these beautiful food stations, and then Michael Bublé played.
Michael Bublé played for the 100th episode party?
Yep.
I didn't know that. I've seen photos from this event. I didn't know he played.
Yeah.
Was he a fan?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I
I did not know that. That's so cool.
Yeah. No, it was great. It was such an interesting era of my life. I learned so many things. There's so that I brought back. I had Joe speak to my students.
Malazzi.
Yeah, Joe Malazzi spoke to I Skyped him in before Zoom. I think I did that a couple of times, where he talked about, writing when we were doing our short films, and talked about character and stuff like that. It's so funny. Like I think I was telling you this. I have like students that'll sit up front in my class, and then in the middle of something, they'll be like, this one guy said, "So what was Teal'c like?" I'm in the middle of teaching. So was Teal'c a nice guy? It's just so like uber fans that are like in my class. It's just so funny.
I would hope they would do well on all the exams and everything else.
Of course they do.
So what was Teal'c like, Cath-Anne? No, seriously, but your who did you enjoy most from production? Who did you yourself really enjoy? When you had when you worked with them, when you came across them,
honestly, and I'm not gonna say, we hung out a lot, all of us. We were going to people's birthdays, and it became very tight. And
Christopher Judge described it as Shangri-La.
Joe would like have, Joe is such a character, and he'd have these movie nights at his house, at the condo that they were renting him or whatever here, and in the theater where we'd watch some crazy, Asian films or something, like just stuff like that, Oscar parties, like just a lot of golf tournaments. The real, like, we spent, people got married, like Tracy Smith, I had her bridal shower at my place.
Wow.
It was very much, they always say a family, but it was. We were quite intertwined, all of us. And we go to fundraisers, and, and I was really fortunate that, Brad or Jonathan or Robert, they'd be like, "Cath-Anne, I got these 2 tickets to something, and I don't want to go." And I'd be like, "I'll take it."
Yeah.
I'd go to these fancy functions on their tickets and stuff.
I've been repeatedly told about, and I'm beginning to gather that it's the rare show, not a lot of them, that would have, the occasional barbecue on the weekends at, the studio, and they bring in bouncy castles for the kids. Yeah. I mean, that's something really special.
And Ray Douglas would be in the back of the studio lot blowing up, you'd never get away with that now in today's day and age.
Yeah.
But, like, they'd be lighting off some special effects stuff, and, and John Smith would be on flipping the burgers, and it was very, quite
tight-knit group.
Yeah, it was a tight-knit group. It was quite cloistered. And I tell you, it was funny because, I think I was watching, what was I watching? Oh, I think I started watching Lynn Smith's episode, and, it's like, you said something like, when you're baking the cake, you don't, like, when you're so involved in it.
Yeah.
And then as I was thinking, it started to grow, and I remember the first time I'd see like these buses coming to the studio, and I remember I went to my office, I had all this swag, and I would roll them up, and I started throwing. I was like grabbing swag, throwing them to the fans, and I was like, and they're all cheering. And I went back up, and somebody said, good team spirit, Cath-Anne. And I was like,
absolutely.
These are the people who are going to appreciate them. I was always trying to get swag out of MGM or anything they, could send up.
Well, if people are going to make a pilgrimage to the gates of Bridge Studios, for crying out loud,
right?
If you have something there that you can give to them, as just like a small thank you of say, "Hey guys, we can't let you in, we can't bring Rick out or anything like that, but here's a shirt or here's a hat." That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, I always I went to conventions, or, when they were first started, I laughed. Someone comes up to me that's from Japan, and she's like, "Who are you?" And she's got our crew photo, and I'm like, "That's me." And then she's like, "Would you sign it?" I circle my little picture of the crew photo and signed it. I'm like, this is crazy. What is happening? So that's when it started really hitting me. It's like, man, this thing is just. But when you're in and you're doing your work and you're so focused on just your day-to-day life, like, it's you don't know, you're just like in a microcosm. Mm-hmm. And then you say, holy cow, like, this thing's going all over the world, and it's a huge fan base. We had to it started getting really tight at the studio once it got bigger. And yeah, like I think they put cameras in the studio, like in our office and stuff. It got.
Was there ever a fan that
There
got a little too
stalkers.
close?
There were stalkers.
Okay.
RDA stalkers.
Yeah, the RDA stalkers are fairly well known. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And
gotta protect them.
They would come up, and there was a motel across the street. I think it was like Access Inn or something, and they would camp. They rent a hotel room and just really like stuff like that. But I mean, that's standard nowadays. Oh my God. Like, there's go downtown, you see something filming and there's paparazzi and,
everywhere.
It's so much bigger than, when we were doing it because of the internet. Right. Yeah. And you can find out where people are shooting and stuff like that. But I do want to tell you a funny story. So my daughter during COVID got into film. And as a COVID monitor type person, and it was funny because she did it when people are like, oh, no. She has not asked me for one connection. And she called me one day. She goes, oh, guess what? I was like, what? She goes, I got my driver's license, like our full driver's license, which is quite difficult to get these days. She goes, I got my driver's license. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, and guess what else? And I was like, what? She goes, I'm starting tomorrow on a Disney series as a COVID monitor. And I'm like, what? But what I was going to tell you is she worked on a show. I'm going to have to get the name of it because I forget what it is.
Yeah.
Called Motherland, season 2, and Amanda Tapping was directing and producing.
Thought I had heard that name before.
And somebody goes up to Amanda, another PA or whatever on set, and is like, oh, hey, you worked with Havana's mom on Stargate. She turns around and she's like, because Havana was always she was at my office a lot. She was really kind of like the Stargate babies. There was a few, Robert had his babies. And
they grew up with the show.
And Amanda turns around, and again, I have a photo of them. I was trying to find it before. And they take a photo together. It was like the full circle moment. And then, of course, Amanda's like, oh, I feel really old. It's like, Havana, I remember you.
Wow.
Yeah, I had 2 computers in my office, and the cast would always come up, and like they would check things like online in my office
before they had laptops and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, they'd be like, well, someone says there's something on that, when they Google or it was really at the beginning of all that. Wow. And so they were kind of like they'd come up and use my computer, whatever. But no, everybody was great. I actually was quite close with Don Davis. It's really strange. He had script ideas and would write scripts, and he would write them out on paper. And at one point, I was driving on the weekends after working all week with a baby, and I would drive out to White Rock where he lived, and I literally would take his pages and put them into script format for his I can't even remember what his films, what his ideas and his scripts were about, but and I'd have lunch with him and his wife, and he was amazing. Just he was someone that, like, I think he was an academic, and then he started doing
taught for a while.
Yeah. And got into film, and but we were, like I said, I at one point after 9/11, they sent me to LA. They were doing a new advertising series, and they're going to do a new poster and a bunch of collateral.
Yeah, because it's switching over to Sci-Fi Channel.
Yeah, and so our publicist at the time, Kim Cowan, was pregnant. She didn't want to go. And so I was always trying to get, I was very interested in all the publicity side of it. And so they're like, Cath-Anne, would you like to go? And I was like, right. So I went. It was a weekend in LA, out in a sort of photography studio. And so, I was hanging out with the cast. We were staying at the W. And here's a little gossip note. So we were all like, after the shoot, RDA wasn't there. I remember Tara was there. Mm-hmm. Chris Judge was there. Amanda was there. And we were in somebody's room, and we were like, we're drinking, whatever, and ordering. Chris Judge is ordering room service, and I get back, and I was like, oh my God, I go into Brad's office because we had high per diems and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I went across the office. Oh my God, there's a huge hotel bill that is coming. And I was so scared because of like, I'm supposed to be like the chaperone. I was like, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I was afraid of, but
The stories about Christopher, though, the man is larger than life in so many ways.
oh,
Oh, you had to keep an eye on that, buddy. Oh, I love him so much.
such a character. They're like amazing. Like Amanda, amazing. Like I honestly, I tried to um I don't know, like you had your own, I hung out, it was quite broad as far as like our friendship bases. Like I hung out with people in the art department,
Yeah.
like I said, we did a lot of stuff together with everybody. It was, but I would go out on the weekends, at the time, like with Joe and Paul
Mm-hmm.
and their partners and things. We'd have dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember once I house sat Brad's house, when he like, I dog sat Robert's dog. I think
Aw.
he wanted to kill me because I got out.
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
it was all like very close knit.
It's the rare, more and more now, the rare job that has a built-in relationship structure, like that you are just you are one of us now.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, we may be all crazy, but you are one of us. You are one of the crazies now. And
I think that's like a series. I think that is what happens on a series. I don't know if that happens on, shorter productions, but yeah, like once you get to that level. And, before I came, I mean, all those people, they go way back. Like
MacGyver.
Yeah, MacGyver
A lot of
and,
them.
Yeah, Outer Limits, with
too.
Brad and John, like all these guys. So there's so much history that you don't even know, but you have to figure out the relationship dynamics as who's related to who and who's married to who before you even, get going. But it was so well organized. Honestly, like people always say that it was like, God bless, John Smith and John Lennox and Andy McKean and those guys. Like it ran like an organized, I would say it's like a military. People think film is, the film. It's like, no, it's a film business and it's organized and, down to every detail.
Yeah, because so much money is on the line,
So much
they have to
money.
know where all of it's going so that they can make sure that that they're in the black by the end of the season. John Smith, I think it was John who was talking about, not like deliberately like moving costs around, but making sure to put a little bit of the fear of God into certain people who were going to, like shoot for the stars and certain things, so that they could be sure to arrive at the black at being in the black by the time they got to the end of the season. You want to make sure that everyone's got runway for all their planes to take off.
Well, exactly, and everybody wants to do the best work they can do, so they want as much money as they can have.
Yeah, they want it to look good.
Because you want your work to look good. And I always, I tell my students very funny stories about, my past life in film. But there was, I can't remember the episode. It was like, anyways, Brad writes, it was one of the gods. It sits on his bejeweled throne.
Okay.
All right. Bejeweled is the word. So the art department comes back with this, mock-up or whatever, and it's gonna be like $85,000 for this bejeweled throne. So Brad comes into my office and goes, Cath-Anne, take out the word bejeweled. It's like, he goes, I don't care, you can sit on a wooden chair for all I care. We're not paying $85,000 for this bejeweled throne, but that's what they do, right? They want it. Yeah.
Bejeweled does suggest adorned in jewels.
Right?
And that's gonna cost money.
It costs money. And so, the constant, it's just funny stuff like that. There's just, so many stories.
There's so much that goes into making just one episode, and to make 22 per year. I don't know how they then went on to do 40 a year. I don't know how they did it. I mean, sure, you can add more bodies to share that load, but the folks at the top, man, oh man, just I talked with Joseph Malazzi extensively about this, and there were times when they were never not thinking about stories, like
No.
anywhere that they would be going. In the back of their mind was this much time until you have to have another story. We have to have stories, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of work to produce all this content, and they did it for 17 television seasons.
Mm-hmm. Oh, every
Who does
weekend,
that?
Brad would go home and be like, I've got to write 8 pages this, weekend, or I got to, or tonight, or, it's always like deadlines. And then the younger writers too, it's hard, it's not easy,
No.
going up against, pitching ideas to these guys.
Yep.
And getting shot down happened a lot. We'd always say, oh, Brad ever said, what were you thinking? And you never wanted to hear that.
Not everything's going to be, yeah.
Brad was always like I always say, like, Brad was a very Canadian, as I told you, I grew up, we found out after I'd been working for quite some time. I said, oh, where did you get married? And he said, oh, you wouldn't know it. It's a little park in Scarborough called David and Mary Thompson Park. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And then we start realizing that we both grew up in the same area and, have all these cross references.
Yeah, you'll know a lot of the same people.
Well, it was so funny. We're both huge Bare Naked Ladies fans. So for his 40th birthday, I got tickets and I went. I went with him and his wife and I think my husband at the time. And and then, like Jonathan was your sort of, I would say Jonathan was the American producer.
Yeah.
He was a lot more scary than Brad in terms of personalities, but not really. He was just more introverted. And
Heather E. Ash always said of Brad's to this day, Heather Ash and her family says, it'll be fine. Like that was kind of Brad's thing.
Yeah. Now Brad was always, but if Brad was mad at you for something, that was even worse because it's like, oh, Brad's mad at me. Joseph and Paul, like, just, love those guys. Joe is like one of my favorite human beings of like all times. He's so interesting. He's so funny. He's just such a joy.
He loves to share. He loves to share stories and, the experience. So I can't thank him enough for that. So he's been on 15 times. At least.
Saw that.
Right.
It's amazing.
How can you have that much to say? Oh, we do.
He has a lot to say. He has so many interesting hobbies and comics. And his office was full of collectibles. Like everywhere you looked, like all these various comic collectibles. And
how did you know? With all that we've said here, you would think that you would be on this train until the very end. How did you know when it was time to get off?
I had a friend who was coming to town making a bunch of movies and had offered me, to be the associate producer, which of course is just a fancy title when they don't want to give you, more money. It was kind of like the time, it was Atlantis, and I think I just, it was time to go somewhere else. I felt, as I said, I had a daughter who was quite young, and I was kind of burnt out at that point, and I wanted to do something different. And, then I just eventually went back to school. It's so funny because it all comes full circle. And I use so many of my experiences now in teaching. Just, for example, somebody spells my name wrong, or you're doing a resume, or you spell your name, I circle it in red, and, that's like the biggest thing you could do. And then I tell the story. It's like, okay, these guys, you may have heard this story. They came into pitch, and I remember who they were. And they kept saying, to get into pitch in that room, you've got to, like, your agent's got to jump through hoops. Like, it's not an easy thing to get in that room. So they're like, okay, so the team from Stargate SG-I, and then Brad would go Stargate SG-1. So anyway, so then the team from Stargate SG-I, go to the gate. Then Brad would go, Stargate SG-1.
So they're not
And
taking the note.
well, maybe they did, but and then when they left, we're all like, learn the name of the TV series that you are going to pitch for.
Wow.
I tell my students, you spell somebody's name wrong or something like that, that's a big deal. You need to check those details.
It's like you don't care. It's
Well,
like, whatever. Where they go, we're moving. This is not the important stuff. It's like, it's important.
Well, for me, I just kept thinking to get into that room, the amount, like, it's such a rare opportunity for anyone to have been able to get in there and pitch ideas. Because especially by that point, it was just like, unless you pretty much came through one of their agents or somebody they knew, a fellow writer or somebody had recommended somebody, but usually, somebody's agent, they'd say, will you give this guy a read? Rob Rothman was all of their agents, and then Rob might recommend somebody.
That was the name of a character, actually. But anyway,
was it?
Robert Rothman. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's always something. I was a character. There was a Cath-Anne Ambrose.
There was, and I believe
and then they changed it. It was Chayla.
Yes, Chayla Horsdal. That's right. We had her on recently. That's it.
Which is so funny, and a really good friend of mine, April Tellick, who was also on the series after I left.
Yep.
April.
She was in Avalon.
April is the hostess with the mostest, and she would always have parties, and a lot of film people would be there. And I met Chayla, and I was like, hey, you played me. But the only reason is the wardrobe department came up, and they needed names for badges. Yeah. And so you'll see, I think Christina McQuarrie's on, like, pretty much they went around, I don't know, Tracy Smith, but like a lot of the people on the show got these.
They sure did.
And then so people in the gate room had our names on their badges just because they knew it would clear. But then I think Chayla started getting more lines and roles.
Yeah, she went through at least 2 or 3 names on the tour, on the couple of ships that she had, and as the show progressed and the resolution increased, you can see the name tag more, and it's just like, it's the same thing happened with Gary Jones. He started off as Norman Davis, and then it became Walter Davis, and then it became Walter Harriman, and it's just like he's like, okay, I'm who now? Okay.
We reused, especially our extras and things. So they reused those extras. Like the same crew, like, different costumes. The same group of people. It was.
What an experience! I am so pleased that we got a chance to connect and share some stories, and there's so much that went into creating this thing, and just to hear little stories, like to hear you bringing up certain things, it's like, I know what that episode was from. I think I know what that episode is from. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes to make an individual episode, and I really appreciate you taking some time to share some of those details.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been such a great experience. It really brought up a lot of great memories of that era.
Yeah.
And it never ends. I always say it's like the gift that keeps on giving, Stargate.
For sure. There's always going to be someone who will come around to be like, I've seen that show. I love that show.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's so great to see my students who are like 19, 20 years old who have discovered it or who are fans.
They're streaming it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you, you probably didn't even, have a chance to think at the time what it is about the content that you guys were creating. It was just churning out the episodes, and we're in active production on a show. There are going to be people out there who are going to like it. Did you ever think that it would be something that you would be talking about 25 years later?
No,
exactly.
I did not at the time. Like I said, you get so, when you're talking to Lynn Smith, you're so caught up in the day-to-day minutia of what you're doing, and that's when when you go to a convention or you see that, how many people and how vast across the world. That was the thing that always shocked me. Like, you're from Australia? You're from Germany? You're here for this? Wow. Or, oh my God. Like there was a really, it was my first experience with like science fiction fandom in terms of like,
the
most rabid fans you can imagine, and in a good way, of course.
Of course. But they're going to come check you out at your office. So you better have the gates up.
Oh, God. I remember one time, one of the guys that went to, and you probably know him, one of the guys like early on at a convention, and then he, after they went out and got a big, huge Stargate tattoo, came in the next day. I think he won a contest or something, I swear. I think, anyways. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Cath-Anne. No, this has been terrific to have you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. All right. Well, you take care, David.
Thank you. That was Cath-Anne Ambrose, script coordinator and production associate for Stargate SG-1. Really appreciate having her on. I've been wanting to have her on for a long time to tell some stories about the production office. There's an ongoing studio that makes these episodes possible week in and week out. And it's an office like any other office, but except that it just has an unusual objective, which is to put out television. And so I've really wanted to have her on for a long time to share some of those stories. Before we let you go, if you like what you've seen in this episode, please click the like button. It makes a difference with the show and will help us continue to grow our audience. Please also consider sharing this video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. And if you plan on watching, I recommend you click that bell icon so that you'll get notified of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this episode will be released over the course of the next few weeks on both the Dial the Gates and GateWorld.net YouTube channels. My tremendous thanks to Cath-Anne for making this episode possible. Tremendous thanks as well to producer Linda Gate Gabber Fury, my moderators Anthony, Tracy, Marcia, Jeremy, Summer. You guys make every live show possible. Frederick Marcoux over at Concepts Web, who keeps dialthegate.com up and running. And Bryce and Matt, Eagle SG, my animators who keep the show looking good. We've got a lot more heading your way, so keep it on dialthegate.com for all the latest details regarding what's coming up. Our San Diego Comic-Con episode should be arriving fairly shortly, so look at dialthegate.com for all the specific dates. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate, and I'll see you on the other side.